And good evening. It's June 27th, 2024, and welcome back to another season and another episode of Sons of the Father. Because we're starting our discussions on The Chosen, Season 4. And of course, created by Dallas Jenkins. And we're so excited to get this season underway, and tonight we're beginning Season 4 with Episode 1, season opener. Promises. Of course, during this series, my dad, John Wern, my brother, Jim Wern, and of course myself, we're going to be having conversation. And we're going to be reflecting on things that have impacted us along our way. So, welcome back to Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, you can click that subscribe button. Those reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think that these might be useful to others, that's when you click that like button, because that is the way the YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So, gentlemen, promises. It's an oddly interesting episode. We were just talking about it before offline. So, Daddy, you'll start us off. How do you want to go with this?
Well, promises is a good name for it because it's a bunch of promises. They're promising something's coming after this, and this had plenty of story to it. With I mean, from the very beginning, where the king is going to Herod's going to get danced for, and I didn't quite get my head around that one because I thought there was more to it than needed to be, and I didn't understand the whole dance thing. So that was part of it, but I did like the very beginning when Mary meets up with Elizabeth. I like the going down the road with the people going, look, it's money. Just take her money. She just wants, whether she's alone. I mean, there, all this drama is going on behind the scenes, and they completely ignore the husband. He's and they're off to themselves, which is kind of the story when there is a child being born, especially in those days where the men weren't involved in it at all. Even when you guys were born, I was rushed out of the room, and the doctor was brought in, and it's just very different. And talking the older woman with so much life experience, and yet never having had a child, and going along with the promise that they would, and then Mary, the child herself. Some I've heard even thought of her as young as 13 or 14 years old, but she was still a teenager, whatever her age was. So I I couldn't fully get my hands around it, even my thinking around it, because there was so much seemed like preparation all the way through it. When they're over there squabbling over the oil, whether he's going to get the oil contract or not. I mean, all kinds of things that were all going to be in other episodes expanded on. I just thought this one, and the two completely, Joanna is loaded with fear, and it seemed like John the Baptist wasn't afraid at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one that was supposed, that was going to be beheaded, and that kind of peaceful is the way that I'd like my life to be now. You're going home with Jesus. what better place could I be? And so again, you had Simon and Judas and their thing with the clothes and all this kind of stuff. So I was really more interested in hear what you guys had to say about it, and then go off from there as you fill in all of what God's talked to you about. So, Jim.
So hang this on a hook because we're going to talk about it. Is John's, like you just said something where you want in your life, we're going to see Jesus. That's a whole nother discussion. John can't be having that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, but he knows where he's going.
So what does he? We don't see. Haha. That adds a lot to the discussion that we will never have time for. That's a whole nother series on its own. But we like to write the story like we like to do the story. The scripture doesn't mention anything about that, truthfully. But it's that because John is the one that sends his own disciples to Jesus going, are you sure you're the one?
Mm-hmm.
He has that
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure? Because there's doubt in John's head.
This never made sense to me, especially after the baptism of Jesus and the dove coming down and this is my son and all of that.
Because they think, and we'll get to when we get to Z's and Judas's talk, they're expecting the king. Don't forget, this is the herald of the king. They're expecting the king. Everyone is expecting the king. Okay? Nobody's expecting what's going to happen. And this sends shockwaves throughout the storyline because it makes people think. It's not, something isn't happening the way we're anticipating it happening. Mm-hmm. It's the herald of the king. Got his head cut off. And he couldn't stop it. Meaning that's the thought, right? Interesting. So just keep that hanging on the hook because we'll mention that when we get to Z and E. So James, go.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was a reminder that this is historical fiction. In terms of there's a lot of extra stuff that isn't biblical. A lot of good scriptural quotes in this one. I mean, Mary or Elizabeth's, words to Mary, straight out of scripture. Yeah. The same thing with Zacharias at John's, commissioning or whatever they call it with babies back then.
Not a commission, yes.
Dedication. There we go. It's a dedication.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a baptism.
No.
Although it would have been funny to have John the Baptist baptized as a child.
Yeah. No, he did. Yeah, he doesn't get the mikvah. Babies don't do that. Yeah. But there is a Nazarite element to it that they're not going to address because it's a little too complicated to address. But you do have a Nazarite deal because there's something that Elizabeth says, which is interesting. I have another take on it, so we'll see if we get there. But go ahead, Jim. Yeah. Continue.
And so I started looking at it. Again, I feel like Dallas, for the most part, keeps within the heart of the story, even though he'll embellish on some of the extra biblical details. And what I saw in this one, I was going back. Yeah, there's definitely promises in this, and sometimes they'll focus on a particular character and just kind of what they're going through, the development of their story. Yeah. This one was a bunch of conversations. And it was interesting watching the different conversations from Mary and Elizabeth, which that threw me because I'm like, I know Elizabeth was older, but somehow in my head, I didn't think she was that old, and so it's like, whoa, she's really old. Whoa, she's pregnant. Whoa, wait a minute. Oh yeah, that's right. It was that. So that whole thing, but watching them interact together, Joanna and her husband and the dynamic there that was going on, Z and Judas in terms of what was going on, Rama and Thomas and their conversation, and then Zebedee and his sons. And it was just kind of fun to watch the relational dynamics that were going on. And again, just reminded, and I wrote this down and it sounded heretical to some degree when I wrote it, but it reminded me of the humanity of God. And you're going, okay, wait a minute. God
No,
isn't human,
I like it.
but
I
think
like
about
it.
the fact that we're created in the image of God.
Mhm.
So we contain divinity in us. And the same thing, I think God contains humanity in him, because he could not have created us out of something that wasn't there, kind of thing. Although he does create things out of nothing. So anyway, but again, it was just that,
Mhm.
I guess, the relational dynamic of who God is.
Yeah.
We didn't see a lot of interaction with Jesus other than just the grief
Mhm.
that he experienced. And we see John and Bob. I know, where you're going to go with this with regard to, even his little look outside, see the lamb, and his reference to, I'm going to a wedding, and the whole, marriage supper of the lamb kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
Sure. There was a whole lot of conversation. And I went, not sure that it would have gone that way
Right.
back then. Most of the conversations that went on probably didn't happen quite like that.
Mhm.
But it definitely helped me catch a sense of heart in this one. Even so much so, I was just softening through the whole thing as I watched each of those relational dynamics, up to John, being beheaded. And it just,
Yeah.
I knew it was coming. I knew the story. Still got me. Still started
Mhm.
crying.
Yeah.
It's like, doggone it.
Yeah.
Dallas, he's so dang good at that.
Yeah.
Sneaking up on you.
Yeah.
But it also reminded me of my humanity,
Mhm.
and loss like that, and all of the different reactions and responses that went on.
Yeah.
When, who was it? It wasn't Andrew. Who was it that said, when he said we weren't prepared for this, and it was like, no, yes, we were prepared for this. And Bob, I would lean your direction in terms of, they weren't prepared for it.
Mhm.
Even though there was a lot leading up to it, they kind of, who gets out of prison, kind of thing in those circumstances,
Mhm.
probably not going to happen.
Mhm.
So they kind of knew something would happen, but probably
Mhm.
snuck up on them in terms of the timing of it and everything.
Yeah.
But that being said, I enjoyed the episode, even though there were parts of it that I went, probably not quite so much, but it was still got me.
Yeah. Dallas has a way of engaging us in
Yeah.
the personalities. He's trying to make these people relatable, and,
Mhm.
and I like. You have promises, and so every tie-in with each of the people have different promise thoughts behind, and or I'm going to use the word expectation. Okay, because sometimes when we think of promises, we think of within that. Then you promise something, I have an expectation, right?
Right.
That's the play out angle, right? So you've got like Zechariah, and he's there, and yeah, the Mary Elizabeth, where you go, because she's that old. And
Mhm.
you're right, you don't really think about it in the deal, but the reason that Zechariah gets muted is because he's a priest, and
Mhm.
he is keenly aware of the Abraham story,
Yeah.
and he still balks knowing the Abraham story. We're not back to back with Abraham going up and Sarah doing the whole junk, da da da. He gets flips. And he said, "So you're going to be mute until then," because he knew that part of the story. So then
Yeah.
they have their nice little deal, and then when he finally gets to speak, it's great. And then we have this wonderful dedicating his son, because he's going to be this, and it is. There's a Nazarite element to it, but again, go look
Yeah.
up Nazarite vows, people, and you'll get an idea of the element of where it's going to go, because that's what he ends up going. She makes the point that he's not going to be a priest like his father. And
Mhm.
that's interesting, because I'm not sure that's how it works. Meaning, Levites are priests.
Right.
They're the only people that can do priestly functions, whatever that's going to be. Now, is he going to follow in his father's footsteps and be that priest that fits in the temple cycle order? Because we know he's involved in that, because we get his cycle order in Scripture, which is interesting. So maybe not following that he's going to be that son doing that, maybe, but the fact he's still going to be a priestly role in this capacity, and he does. So he fits this role as a Levite doing this, blah, blah, blah. We get this same spiel, right? almost Aaron-esque, with Aaron being his brother and speaking for Moses back again in the story with Joseph. The elements with promises with Thomas and Rami, interesting. I want to take a little left turn here, just a little bit, and go, because it's an interesting discussion that they're having, and they're talking about Dad said no.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was, well, can we find a way around it? So then they go back to tradition and practice. And then when they go to the group, that's not what they lead the group to believe. Not almost was sin by omission, right? They really kind of leave out that they're trying to work something out on their own, right or wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just an interesting twist that they take, because everything that they mention isn't scriptural. It's interesting when they say the law of Moses says that stuff, and that's Talmudic, which I'm not against practice at all. So let me just make sure that's a deal. If that's the way I want to do. We do the same thing today with our vows.
Yeah.
I did like the vows, actually, though, when Thomas leans to her and he goes, where did I wrote it? Right there. It says, will you forever walk with me and read with me and ride along endless roads and extenuating circumstances with me? Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah. I thought that was a very encompassing statement. But there was a little bit in this where I go, okay, I wonder if that's going to come back to bite them, because that's they weren't being forthright in this with everything that's going on in this little setup that they have that piece. But let's talk a little bit about Z and Judas talking. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about that, because we have, again, expectations, because everybody, these are all Jewish men, and they're all raised on Torah, so they are very much aware of a Messiah, and then what the expectation of that Messiah is. Promise gets a little more fluid in that, but definitely there's a promise of a Messiah, right? So that's a promise. Okay. The expectation is what it looks like. Yeah. I expect it to look like this. You promise a Messiah. I'm expecting somebody to take over for Rome, right? Right. And Judas is fixated on that. But if you listen to what he said, did it strike you, just wondering if it struck you the same way it struck me, that I'm hearing a church business meeting discussion? I'm at ex-Baptist church, I won't call them out, in California, and I'm hearing that very business conversation.
I would concur. That's exactly where I went listening to it. Even so much, I remember there was a church here in Southern California that was a big church, gave a lot to missions. And there was discussion that if we build a bigger sanctuary and have a bigger church, we're going to be able to give more money to missions. So let's build this. And at the time, it was a $10 million building. That was a lot of money at the time that they built it, if I remember correctly. And they did it. It's gorgeous and everything. But again, it was a business approach rather than, a God approach kind of thing. And it was interesting. I was looking at the two of them, and they're both Z is Simon the Zealot. And we know his background. Mm-hmm. Judas is zealous also. And you see it in his, I want to make this work. I want, to get the finances going so that we can, build this thing that Jesus is doing, and he was so much into that. And yet to see now, obviously Simon has been at it a little bit longer than Judas has, but what he's done with that zealot heart of his, he's turned it in, and he's looking at life more like what Jesus did. Again, whether that was actually happening or not, I don't know. But in the story, as Dallas is unfolding it, you see this transformation in Z from a very active, very vocal to, and let's slow it down here. Let's listen to Jesus.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good. Dad?
I'm going to springboard off of what you're talking about because that struck me. Was Joanna or so when she was down in the prison trying to hustle. I've been paying this guy off. I'll just give him. This isn't going to work. Yeah. And her being shut down. It was the same kind of applying the tactic that works, that has business. Go back to your analogy. Okay, so Judas is saying that he wants to build this thing up. He wants to be part of this movement and part of the glory of all the things that happen. Let's do it bigger, faster, stronger. And Z, as you guys are calling him, is playing it down, which is kind of surprising because he was the one that is pulling his knife out and ready to battle. I remember one time when I first went to Ghana, and we went to a construction site to get a couple of guys to do some work for us. And what they had was guys mixing cement and then handing it and going up the ramp and building. And I said to William, wouldn't it be easier if they got, well, let's buy them a cement mixer and they can mix it and pour and they can, and he just looked at me, not judging or anything, he just looked at me and said, and put all these people out of work. And that's the way I felt when I saw this, what Judas was doing, build it bigger, build it better, build it instead of the ministry part of it. What we're doing to change lives. He saw himself with fancy robes, walking the parade route, the whole thing. And in our own lives, as we look at them and say, shame on him, that we do this as you just said. If we build a bigger sanctuary, we can give more money to missions. You can say that, but we're using that person, that situation, whatever, to attain our own goals. And then you go over to John the Baptist, and that dude was not that way at all. He was just, this is what he came down for, was to give the message and say the message. And he was out baptizing and that sort of thing. And so it kind of, it brought me all, it makes me want to watch the other episodes is what it does. So you can see all of this as it unfolds. And in my own life, to think more about the mission than the glory. And that those words that I just told you that William said was probably 30 years ago. And I still remember it because it so said where I was not understanding and where he was. And then as I see Jesus's walk, as I see this story unfolding, which is to me what this episode is, it's just opening the door for so many things to begin to happen. And I'm looking forward to it.
We have an interesting point. We still have challenges overlaying how we think backwards, right? Like that you mentioned, well, we need to be ministry oriented. There's no such thing as that. then. Okay, that's the way we look at it. Isn't happening that way then. And living in the direction they're going, we're thinking about and talking about Jesus. That's developing, that's growing, that's not a yet answer. It's a what are we going to do with this answer, right? Meaning that we would use the term, it does it every day to us. In the story that we're looking at today, it's history is unfolding in front of our eyes, that kind of thing. And so if you're like as it's playing out, and all the gospel writers do it, they all have quotes as the ancients said, and they flash back, right? They're not seeing it at the moment that they're there. Those things were written 20, 25, up to 40 years later, where they're referencing and talking about these things then, right? We just have this challenge in the story as it's being played out, because Judas he's going to end up being one of those, is a scapegoat story anyways, but it looks like Dallas is building him up to be that view. He's going to be that view that's going to almost represent the rest of the people, as well as we get down the road. His response is going to play that way. Dad, I think your point of Z is a good one, because he's, for the guy that was willing to kill, he is now the servant. Z is being Z, arguably, with the characters that Dallas has created. Let me make that very clear. Z, with the characters that Dallas Jenkins has created on The Chosen, so I don't get misquoted, is the one that's getting it the most at this point.
The most transformed, I agree.
Yeah. They're getting him to where he was this, and now he's servant.
Yeah.
Like I said, he's comfortable. And he says, like he tells Judas, then put your brain into washing the clothes better.
Right.
Yeah. Put your brain there. That's interesting, because that would be hard for me. It's true. That would be hard for me. And not would, is. Let's just be honest. It's true. And just that point of, he's saying, serve whatever Jesus needs us to do. And the clothes work is important. He kept reminding him, this is important. You don't think it is.
Right.
But it is. And then, like I said, doing, not only is important, but doing it right. Are the clothes clean? There's a lot wrapped into, to me, it's something simple as that. That was one of my favorite conversations. And again, a total historical fiction moment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, had an awful lot of, where is this going to take us, right?
Yeah.
In the expectation. They're building up, like you said, Dad, they're story building on this, and this was definitely getting us in that role. I'm interested to see where all the disciples play out as things start to devolve. I get down in, because we don't hear them mentioned at all in Scripture. So he's going to end up having to play out 12 guys, even though we just get a handful of interactions on those. So it gets a bit. The phrase that they use, money, power, and efficiency. And I go, that's interesting, because he's basically laying out the same thing. We would say that negatively if we were talking about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, money, power, and efficiency. And then we put it on our side, and we change power to influence. We find a more positive way to spin it. Yeah. We still, money, they said, building a better church to get a bigger coffer. Influence, how we're going to influence people, influence for the da-da-da, and efficiently do it. We have that same deal. So I continue to be not throwing those people under the bus as much as church entity has a penchant of doing, and has been for the last 2,000 years. So, which is a pity. Jesus. Dad, you mentioned that the point about him at the end. We're wrapping this up, and we get to him knowing or not knowing is a whole nother discussion for another time.
Yeah.
But the fact of what it does to him, and you watch him walk in, and the whole play out with that scene where Joanna's knocking on the door, telling him almost the buckle knees.
Right.
And then it's, I'll go find Philip. And then we got to tell Jesus. And then Jesus walks up. And he's very culturally in the moment at the place. He's torn his clothes. One could say the shawl he's wearing is sackcloth. And literally ashes on his head and on his forehead. You could see it. He's devastated. Family death. Yeah. So what, so we were talking about, does Jesus, and what's the impact of what do we know versus how it hits us? Because the truth is, we know we're all going to die. I hate to say it. It's true. We're all going to die. And so in theory, you'd say, remember that question where they said, are they prepared for it? Yeah. You go, there's not a secret how or why. The question there is the why question. How is you're going to get executed in prison? There's probably a handful of ways you're going to get executed in prison. The why is the question. And you mentioned that does John know where he's going? That's a whole nother discussion. But
I look at it the same way as Paul. Paul said to die and to live. Either way, I'm good with it, and that's the way I personally want to look at it. As long as I'm here, what do you have for me to do, Lord?
Mm-hmm.
And if I die, you guys get the money, and I'm with Jesus. So it's win-win for me, and I that's the way I looked at. Yes, it is different, but that's the way I looked at John the Baptist. Is he, even the look on his face and everything that they did in that scene, he wasn't panicked. He wasn't fighting it. And I it's sad. Of course, it's coming, so that makes a big difference. But
well, he's not the first prophet to die uncomfortably.
Yeah.
He will be. He's the first of, one would say, that's of messianic involvement, and then we get to the apostles, and they all have
the way they go.
We're not
I'll
going to get
take John's way, man. Cut my head off.
Yeah,
make it quick. Hang me upside down. Burn me.
But they're not.
Me. No.
But there's other prophets and how they were treated before and all that stuff. That's not. That's the territory of a prophet, and the prophet being the one that speaks for God, and this the herald of. That goes with the territory, and all of them know it. I think people today that claim that little deal that they're prophets or prophetesses or something, and I go, I don't think you understand the story, and it really doesn't end well for those guys. It really doesn't, for multiple reasons. But yeah, it's John. At least we would like to hope that John is comfortable that he's done his job, right? Mm-hmm. John's done his task, and I think that was the point that he's making at the end, where there's talking and said, "John, were we prepared?" John did his part to get us to here. So now we're the ones that carry it from here. John did that part to get us to here. And John is saying, I did my part. Is it ending the way I expected? Probably not. But will the phrase, will God's will be done? Again, Jesus says that very phrase that we're supposed to be thinking on that way. Will God's will happen? Yes. Do we know that will? But we do hope, right? And we do pray, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, any wrap-up points?
It was interesting seeing Jesus's face again. It's for dramatic purpose, but I got that impression that it's like John's gone. John was taking a lot of the heat.
Yeah.
So
Right.
without him taking the heat anymore, it's now going to be on me. And I think he felt the weight of what took place, not just a man dying, but who that man represented and what he was doing to prepare for Jesus. Now it's like a launch. Jesus is now, boom, front and center.
Yeah.
And that's going to be huge.
Oh, and it was, and it was definitely a ramp up, and the ripple effect was felt across the board, and just like it does often, the ripples in a pond, they affect one side of the pond and the other side of the pond, right? Mm-hmm. So not only did they have the ripple effect on the Jesus side of the equation, but on the Roman side of the equation, they've just opened up unrest. And this is not what they want. This is the other side of the circle of ripples. This is going to build up too. So both of these sides are going to start building. The tsunami hits both sides. And we're getting to that point where, where as these continue to grow, this is where we're going to take ourselves. So interesting episode. I'm interested to see, again, where this goes. I'm glad that people have started to get to see this. The reason we waited this long, folks, is we're reminding people that we wanted to wait for people to be able to see it for free so that we could get as many people that had seen it to be able to take a look and were able to look at the episodes before, because all of these are designed on the expectation that you've seen it already. So, because we don't want to be the spoiler alert, right? That's not our intent on here. We want you to go and then listen to our banter. So just keep that in mind. So we're gonna continue to discuss this series. We're gonna bounce around ideas. We'll see what thoughts come up in our heads along our journey, right? But also, if you had any questions, you are always welcome to send an email to bob@TheDustyFeet.com, or you can leave them in the comments. We'll answer either way, because we're going to be happy to ponder any other ideas or any questions as they arise. We'll be glad to check them out. And again, shalom, shalom to all of you. And thanks for with us tonight with the Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet.